Okay, let's really get into this. When you see a massive financial scheme just implode, right?
Mm.
Billions gone, people lose their life savings, their homes. Where do you even start to point the finger?
Well, that's the core question, isn't it?
Hmm.
Is it just the fraudsters? Or, and this is uncomfortable, are the regulators, the ones meant to be the watchdogs, actually contributing to the problem?
Yeah, and that's what makes looking at these sources so, well, unsettling. We're comparing these huge Australian financial disasters, Trio Capital, which everyone remembers, but also newer ones like Shield, First Guardian, Dixon Advisory.
Exactly. And the aim isn't just to say things went wrong. It's to dig into systemic failures and even serious claims that the whole regulatory process might have been, well, corrupted.
And Trio Capital, it's like the textbook case, isn't it? The scale is just staggering. What was it, 6,090 investors lost money?
That's right. And out of those, 5,400 had their money in APRA-supervised super funds. You hear that number and you immediately think, hang on, wasn't APRA supposed to be supervising these?
Precisely. Who was minding the shop?
So the first really stark injustice with TRIO was how the victims were treated differently. You had those 5,400 investors in the APRA funds. Okay, they eventually got compensation from the government.
Okay.
But then there were another 690 investors, people who invested directly or through their self-managed super funds, SMSFs. They got nothing. Zero.
Wait a minute. Same fraud,
All right.
right? Same criminals stole their money. Why on earth would the government compensate one group and just leave the other hanging?
It boiled down to this really quite devastating loophole in the superannuation law, Part 23 of the Superannuation Industry Supervision Act, the SIS Act, from 1993.
Right.
Essentially, this law created two tiers of protection. If your money was in an APRA-supervised fund, you were covered by this financial assistance provision. But if you were an SMSF or a direct investor, you fell outside that safety net.
And the crucial part.
The crucial part is that nobody really told consumers this. You weren't given a warning like, hey, if you choose this type of fund, you're on your own if there's massive fraud.
So the system itself basically encouraged a kind of unfair competition. Go with an SMSF, you're, I don't know, swimming outside the flags, as someone later put it, but no one actually points out where the flags are.
That's a good way to put it. And you immediately saw the regulators pointing fingers. Take the ULN Property Holdings case, also under the TRIO banner. Another 500 funds lost, what, $36 million?
And also ineligible for help.
Also ineligible.
Yeah.
And the reason given initially, the AFP, ASIC, APRA, they said they couldn't identify fraud.
Seriously, in a scheme that collapsed like that, how could they not see fraud?
Well, the sources show it was actually a financial advisor, a guy named Colin Warren, who dug in and found the evidence of fraud. But then he got the runaround. ASIC says go to APRA. APRA says talk to the AFP. AFP sends him back to ASIC. It was just a mess.
A perfect circle of buck passing.
Yeah, demonstrating what a later Parliamentary Joint Committee called various points of systemic weakness.
Yeah.
It wasn't just the regulators. It was auditors, custodians, research houses. The whole financial supply chain failed.
And the human cost.
Yeah.
You can't forget that.
Absolutely not. People lost their life savings. Some lost their homes. And then they were just ignored for more than 10 years. The sources are clear. Tragically, there were at least 2 suicides linked directly to the fallout from this fraud.
Okay, this shifts things, doesn't it? From incompetence, maybe negligence, to something potentially much darker. The sources talk about process corruption. What exactly are we talking about here? Can you define that for us?
Yeah, it's a heavy term. It comes from Justice Wood during the Wood Royal Commission in the mid-90s. Process corruption isn't necessarily about an official lining their own pockets. It's about manipulating an official process to get a specific outcome.
Like what kind of outcome?
Well, it could be making sure a guilty person walks free, or twisting things to make an innocent person look guilty. It's about abusing the process itself. And for the TRIO victims, they looked at ASIC's actions over the decade that followed, the alleged cover-ups, and saw exactly that process corruption.
And the sources suggest politics played a role in this alleged manipulation, specifically mentioning the Superannuation Minister at the time, Bill Shorten.
That's the allegation laid out in the sources, yes,
Hmm.
that the minister allegedly suppressed some evidence and made what's described as an unconscionable distinction between the victims.
That's swimming outside the flags comment again.
Right. The implication was that union fund members were sort of passive victims, but SMSF investors, well, they were somehow risk takers who'd put money into troubled funds and maybe didn't deserve the same sympathy or help. It immediately politicized the whole thing.
And this political angle, the sources claim, led to ASIC targeting a specific person, an advisor named Ross Tarrant.
Yeah, the connection alleged is that Tarrant advised the Australian Workers' Union, which the minister had strong ties to. Now, look at the numbers of sources present. They're pretty stark. Tarrant was just one of 155 advisors whose clients were caught up in TRIO.
Okay, one of many.
But in the court documents related to ASIC's actions, Tarrant's name appears 853 times. Compare that to Frank Richard Bell, a key perpetrator. The guy running TRIO for years mentioned just 7 times.
Wow, 853 versus 7. That doesn't sound like an even-handed investigation.
It certainly looks like focusing heavily on one person, the so-called low-hanging fruit, maybe to achieve a particular outcome that deflected attention from the bigger regulatory failures. That's the allegation.
It paints a picture of a predetermined narrative, and then there are ASIC's own failures, the omissions. These are quite specific and damning. Let's go through them. First, what ASIC apparently knew about the TRIO owners before TRIO even existed.
This one really hits at the core idea of checking if people are fit and proper to run financial companies. The sources state ASIC failed to disclose that they already knew about Jack Flater and James Sutherland. Years before TRIO, back in 2001-2002, ASIC had visited their office in Hong Kong.
Why?
They seized about 100,000 documents related to a big tax scheme. One of the clients involved in that scheme was later jailed for fraud against the Commonwealth.
So ASIC knew these individuals were connected to highly questionable, even criminal financial activities.
And yet they were still allowed to set up and operate the very company, TRIO Capital, that later collapsed so spectacularly. It's presented not as a simple oversight, but a major failure to connect obvious red flags.
Okay, omission number 2, the identity confusion. This one sounds almost unbelievable.
It really highlights a failure in basic checks over an 8-year period. You have 2 key figures. First, Paul Richard Bell, or PRB. ASIC helped jail him in 2001 for running cold-calling investment scams.
Okay, known fraudster.
Then you have Frank Richard Bell, SRB. He was effectively running TRIO's operations until 2008. And importantly, he'd already been permanently barred from the industry in the U.S. by the regulator FNRA.
So 2 Bells, both involved in dodgy finance, one jailed by ASIC, one barred in the U.S.
Exactly. But ASIC apparently waited until October 2009, after TRIO had collapsed, to conduct a formal, compulsory examination using what's called a Section 19 notice. 16 pages of technical questions trying to figure out if PRB and FRB were actually the same person.
8 years. It took them 8 years and a collapse to ask that question.
That's what the timeline suggests. A basic fit and proper person check seems to have been missed for almost a decade.
Just staggering. Okay, the third omission, the deal with the devil, as the sources term it.
Right. This relates to getting convictions after the collapse.
Okay.
In 2010, there was an overseas fund manager, Carl Meerveld, who apparently offered significant help to ASIC's investigation. Information, evidence.
Okay.
But ASIC turned down his offer. Instead, they cut a deal for assistance with Sean Richard, who was one of the actual perpetrators inside TRIO.
They chose to work with the criminal instead of the external expert.
That's what happened. And critically, ASIC never told the Supreme Court of New South Wales, which was handling Richard's sentencing, that Meerveld had offered help.
Why is that significant?
Because the court gave Sean Richard a massive sentence discount, 37.5%, based on the value of his assistance. If the court didn't know there was potentially other, maybe better, information available from Meerveld, they might have overestimated how crucial Richard's help really was.
And we don't even know what Richard provided.
No. The details of his assistance were submitted as Exhibit B, and it remains sealed, confidential. So the public can't assess if it was genuinely valuable or just, convenient for securing a conviction while potentially obscuring the full picture.
So that lack of transparency around TRIO, the sealed exhibits, the alleged cover-ups, it wasn't just about the past, was it? It had real consequences for the future.
Absolutely. The sources argue that by not being open, by not allowing Parliament and the public to really understand what went wrong, including the specific gaps and loopholes in the legislation.
Gaps which were later confirmed.
Yes. A Freedom of Information release in 2018 actually confirmed that material about TRIO was deliberately withheld. Why? Because releasing it might allow people with malicious intentions to spot those very gaps and exploit them.
Okay, so trying to prevent future crime by hiding the details of a past crime. That sounds like a flawed strategy.
It seems to have backfired spectacularly. The argument is that this failure to properly investigate and expose the vulnerabilities in the system is precisely why similar schemes could be repeated. We're now seeing collapses like Shield and First Guardian.
And the losses there are huge, aren't they?
Over $1 billion potentially gone from managed investment schemes. They're projected to make the $180 million trio collapse look small by comparison.
Which brings us to the Dixon Advisory collapse. This one feels different, the sources suggest, maybe because of the type of clients involved.
That's certainly the allegation of potential bias in how it was handled. Dixon's clients were often high-net-worth individuals. Now, consider this. A Senate inquiry was set up to look into the Dixon collapse and the sustainability of the compensation scheme.
Right, sounds necessary.
But it was canceled, quietly shut down in August 2025. And the person chairing the committee that canceled it, Senator Jane Hume.
And the significance of that is?
Senator Hume was the Minister for Financial Services back when Dixon actually collapsed in January 2022. The timing and the connection definitely raise eyebrows.
And there's more, isn't there, about former Dixon staff?
Yes, the sources point out that some senior people from Dixon Advisory now hold positions within the federal treasury. That's the very government department responsible for overseeing financial services regulation. It feeds into this perception, fair or not, that this system might be protecting its own.
And this ties into the compensation scheme, too, the CSLR.
It does. The compensation scheme of last resort, which, remember, is funded by levies on all financial advisors, not just the ones involved in collapses, is paying out to Dixon clients. But the nature of the payouts is interesting.
How so?
For many Dixon clients, the compensation isn't just for lost capital. It's calculated using complex, but for, scenarios to determine opportunity cost. Basically, the potential profit they might have made if their money hadn't been tied up in Dixon's flawed advice.
So, let me get this straight. The clients, who are described as people like senior Canberra public servants, former department heads, government insiders with significant SMSFs, they might not have lost much of their initial capital.
Correct. Many likely preserved their capital base.
But they're receiving potentially millions from this compensation scheme for profits they might have missed out on.
That's the scenario presented. And it creates this stark contrast, this paradox. You had trio SMSF victims losing their homes, their entire savings, told, sorry, loophole, you get nothing. Now you have high net worth Dixon clients potentially getting opportunity cost payouts funded by the broader advice industry.
That two-tiered system you mentioned earlier, it's still fundamentally there, just in a different form.
It seems so. And the blame game continues. The sources conclude that the major players, ASIC, APRA, the trustees, the auditors, have become very adept, often collectively, at spinning the narrative to blame financial advisors whenever things go wrong.
While avoiding scrutiny of their own role in letting problematic products or schemes flourish in the first place.
Precisely. Evading accountability seems to be a recurring theme.
The scale of this problem, it's just undeniable now. The sources mention a truly shocking statistic: over 70 inquiries and reviews into the financial sector in recent years.
70, yes. And yet, the major problems keep happening. It led Senator Andrew Bragg in the 2024 Senate Economics Committee report, which actually recommended a whole new regulatory structure to state it plainly. It is clear ASIC has failed.
When you hear that, after 70 inquiries, you have to ask, what is ASIC actually doing day to day?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? If the pattern is just being reactive, chasing the low-hanging fruit like individual advisors after collapse, and fundamentally failing to deter large-scale corporate crime, then who are they really protecting? It's certainly not the average Australian investor.
And this widespread sense of failure has led to a pretty drastic call to action, hasn't it? From the AIOFP.
Yes, the Association of Independently Owned Financial Professionals. They're not just asking for another review, they're calling for a full royal commission, specifically into the regulators and the trustees.
And they have a clear agenda for what needs investigating.
They do. 3 key things. First, probe these allegations of process corruption within ASIC and other government agencies. Get to the bottom of that.
Okay.
Second, demand an answer. Why does ASIC always seem to find the major failures and breaches only after a scheme has collapsed and the money's gone? Why aren't they proactive?
And the third point, this feels crucial for breaking the cycle.
Absolutely. They want ASIC to be required, mandated, to investigate every single link in the financial chain transparently when something goes wrong. No more scapegoating advisors or victims. Look at the product issuers, the platforms, the research houses, the auditors, the regulators themselves.
Get the full picture, finally.
Exactly. The ultimate goal, as the sources put it, is straightforward but seemingly elusive.
Yeah.
We need regulators who are responsive, yes, but also
Oh.
transparent and laser focused on actual enforcement. That's how you build public confidence.
Confidence, which, the sources sadly conclude, is just missing right now. Hashtag tag tag outro.
So when you connect the dots here, this deep dive really paints a disturbing picture. It suggests a direct line from the failures in transparency and accountability around Trio Capital, the alleged cover-ups, the process corruption claims, to the later, even bigger collapses.
Because the system never truly learned. The focus was on damage control and blame shifting, not on fixing the underlying weaknesses.
It seems that way. Those legislative gaps acknowledged in the FOI release, the mysteries surrounding Sean Richards' Exhibit B. These aren't just historical footnotes. They represent missed opportunities to understand and to reform.
When the instinct is to hide the flaws, whether it's to protect individuals or maybe stop malicious intentions from exploiting loopholes, you prevent the system from actually getting better.
It becomes impossible for it to self-correct effectively.
So maybe the final thought for you, the listener, is this. If transparency, the very thing needed to learn from these catastrophic mistakes, is routinely sacrificed for political reasons, or legal expediency, or just institutional self-preservation, how can anyone trust that the next billion-dollar disaster won't just be a repeat performance?
Yeah, you have to ask. By keeping those loopholes and those critical details hidden, whose interests are really being protected? Is it the public's?
Yeah.
Or something else?